I am 77 years old. If someone told you that a 101-year-old mother called the police and accused her own children of plotting to murder her, only to break down in tears and apologize to the entire family a few months later, would you believe it? I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't lived through it myself. My mother is 101 years old. She lived through war, poverty, and the loss of her husband. For most of my life, she was the strongest person I knew. But last winter, I watched an invisible illness slowly steal her ability to tell reality from fear, and it nearly tore our family apart. At first, the changes were small. She began forgetting things that had happened only minutes earlier. She would ask the same question over and over again throughout the day. Sometimes she would talk about events from 50 years ago, as if they had happened yesterday. We assumed it was simply part of growing old. Then one day, she pulled me into a corner and whispered, "Don't trust your brother. He wants to get rid of me." I was stunned. My brother visited her almost every day. He bought groceries for her, organized her medications, and handled countless things around the house. But my mother was convinced she had heard something that proved otherwise. As time went on, she began hearing voices that weren't there. At 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone would ring. She would tell me that people downstairs were discussing plans to force her out of her home. When I rushed over, the house would be completely silent, except for the ticking of a clock. She started interpreting ordinary conversations as threats. When we discussed hiring a caregiver, she believed we were planning to send her to a nursing home. When we talked about replacing the locks, she believed we intended to lock her inside. When we reviewed her medications, she became convinced we were trying to drug her. The situation finally spiraled out of control after one particular incident. One evening, my brother and his wife were cleaning out some old furniture in their garage. The furniture had become damp and moldy. I later learned that they had been saying, "We need to get rid of this stuff soon. We can't keep putting it off." But my mother overheard part of the conversation from a distance and interpreted it in a completely different way. The next morning, without telling anyone, she went to the police station. A few hours later, 2 police cars pulled up outside my brother's house. Neighbors came out to watch. The officers informed us that my mother had reported that her son was planning to kill her and take control of her property. The investigation quickly confirmed that none of it was true, but the fear in her eyes was real. She genuinely believed that her own child intended to harm her. After that, People in the neighborhood started looking at us differently. Some believed her story. Others quietly wondered whether we were mistreating an elderly parent. No matter how much we tried to explain, there was no way to convince everyone. A few weeks later, things became even worse. My mother secretly contacted an attorney. I only found out when the attorney called me to verify some information. She had changed her will. She planned to donate most of her assets to her church and several charities. In the documents, she had written a sentence that I will never forget. My children are simply waiting for me to die. When I read those words, I broke down. It wasn't about the money. It was because the woman who had loved us all her life no longer trusted us at all. That evening, my brother sat alone on the front steps of her house for a long time. He finally said, if Dad were still alive, this would break his heart. It was the first time I had ever seen this man, now in his 60s, quietly wipe away tears like a child. Even then, we never stopped caring for her, because the doctors kept reminding us of something important. She wasn't doing this on purpose. She was sick. But the worst was still ahead. One freezing night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, my mother woke up terrified. Later, she told her doctors that she had heard voices in the living room discussing plans to remove her from the house before sunrise. The voices were not real, but to her, they were. So she did something that left our entire family devastated. She put on her nightgown, packed a bank book, a stack of old photographs, and a worn suitcase, and walked out of the house alone. By morning, her caregiver discovered she was gone. Panic spread through the family immediately. We called the police. Neighbors joined the search. My brother drove through nearby neighborhoods over and over again. My daughter posted my mother's photograph in local community groups. For 7 long hours, there was no sign of her. Those were the longest 7 hours of my life. I genuinely feared I would never see my mother again. Then, sometime that afternoon, a bus driver called. He had found an elderly woman sitting alone at the final stop on his route. When we arrived, I saw a scene I will never forget. My 1-and-1-year-old mother was curled up on a bench. The cold wind was blowing through her white hair. She was clutching her old suitcase so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. Inside were photographs of my father when he was young, along with pictures of us as children. When she saw us approaching, she pulled away in fear. Again and again, she repeated the same words. Please don't send me away. Please don't send me away. No one could hold back their tears, because at that moment, we finally understood something. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of being abandoned. Soon afterward, her doctors strongly recommended hospitalization for a full medical evaluation and treatment. After extensive testing, specialists confirmed that my mother was suffering from severe cognitive impairment, accompanied by hallucinations, delusions, and intense paranoid beliefs. The doctors explained that the voices she heard, the danger she saw, and the fears she felt were all completely real inside her mind. This wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't manipulation. And it certainly wasn't cruelty. It was a disease. Then, during the 3rd week of treatment, something remarkable happened. One afternoon, I walked into her hospital room, as I always did. She was sitting quietly by the window. Sunlight rested softly on her silver, white hair. When she looked up at me, I immediately noticed something different. The fear was gone. The suspicion was gone. For the first time in months, I saw my mother again. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Then she quietly asked, "Have I made things very difficult for all of you?" I froze, because it was the first truly clear thing she had said in months. Over the following days, she became more and more lucid. She began realizing that many of the things she believed had never actually happened. She started separating real memories from the illusions created by her illness. She slowly began understanding everything our family had done for her during those difficult months. About a week later, she asked to see everyone. That afternoon, our entire family gathered in her hospital room. She looked at my brother. She looked at me. She looked at her grandchildren. She looked at the very people she had accused, feared, and even reported to the police. Then she began to cry. "I thought you wanted to abandon me," she said. "I thought you wanted to hurt me. I believed voices that never existed. But now I understand. The people who never gave up on me were you." The room fell completely silent. My brother lowered his head. My daughter cried openly. And I simply held my mother's hand. That hand was 101 years old, thin, fragile, and covered in wrinkles. Yet in that moment, I felt like a little girl again, holding my mother's hand while crossing the street. After everything we went through, I finally learned something. The hardest part of love is not giving. The hardest part of love is staying when you are misunderstood. My mother is still 101 years old. She still forgets things. Sometimes she still confuses yesterday with decades ago. But she is no longer afraid of us. And for me, that is enough. I cannot stop time from taking pieces of her memory. I cannot erase the sadness that comes with growing old. But I will never forget the day She became clear again and gently squeezed my hand before saying, "Thank you for not giving up on me." In that moment, I knew that every painful day we had endured finally meant something. Many people believe that the hardest part of love is sacrifice. After living through this experience, I have come to believe that the hardest part of love is choosing to stay when you are misunderstood. My mother is 101 years old now. She still forgets things, and sometimes she still mixes yesterday with events from decades ago. But she is no longer afraid of us. And for me, that is enough. Because some misunderstandings eventually find their way to the truth. Some wounds slowly heal with time. And perhaps the true meaning of family is simply this: standing beside one another during the most confusing and difficult moments of life, and refusing to walk away